Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
Anyone could believe Bonham was not even close to the type of drummer I'm. Simply amazing. Bonham had method. The name Ginger Baker is one that's essential when discussing the finest rock drummers ever, with ferocious, explosive, and creative style of play. He wasn't only the cream's heartbeat among the earliest 1960s supergroups, but also a creator of the contemporary drum solo, someone who disregarded the distinctions between rock, African rhythms, and jazz. Ordered by among the top 3 is Rolling Stone drummers throughout history. His solos, such as the famous Toad, are still regarded as timeless to this day. However, behind the title of legend was a very distressed guy, erratic, domineering, and addicted, and alone. As his music sparked millions, his private life consisted of a number of conflicts with fellow musicians, with former spouses, together, with his kids, and finally, with himself. Eric Clapton once explained living next to Ginger Baker and working together to a ticking time bomb. Additionally, that bomb for the ground continued to tremble for decades below it. From an individual who lost his Ginger Baker's father during World War II became the rhythmic symbol of a period. However, did the publicity ever help to mend the wounds that were hidden inside him? Additionally, what a brilliant man you die in debt, loneliness, and resentment? Ginger Baker's life was a patternless drumbeat that is full of chaos, genius, and contradictions. What was actually below that roaring beat? Let's investigate. Childhood. The Ginger Baker was born in Lewisham, South Carolina, in 1939. London, just as the Second World War started. Bombs thundered through the air. Of England, a slender boy with red hair into the world with wide eyes, bringing a dangerous future with him from the moment he took his first breath. His dad, Van Baker, Frederick Lew, was an military soldier in the British Army sent to North Africa over the campaign of El Alamein. Ginger was just 4 years old. When a messenger was not yet produced, rapped on the door, and brought the news of his father's murder. It was an emptiness rather than merely a loss that would never be full. I had no father when I was growing up, and no one ever, Ginger once said. I learned how to be a man from his mother. Ruby Baker was a severe, unforgiving, and reticent woman. She put forth a lot of effort to raise her kids, but she was unable. To provide, a youngster needs warmth. Ginger grew up in a discipline-driven home, but without love. Additionally, it was that lack of emotion that created a flaming, rebellious nature, constantly striving to release yourself. His early years were spent idly riding his bike through the London's streets, missing school, engaging in combat, and enduring the filthy post-war British slums. The nation was still recovering, and children had no space for fantasies like him, only the survival instinct. Later, Ginger remembered that he acquired survival skills such as an untamed creature, untrusting of everyone and prepared to protect himself with his fists. He was introduced to music by accident, but it seemed fated. At 15, a teacher observed Ginger's peculiar timing and advised him to give the drums a try. The boy with the red hair had nothing to lose, began hammering away at anything he could locate, tin cans and tabletops. Immediately, his sole means of escape from he didn't belong in this world. He worked on it, daily fixation on rhythm, and soon stumbled upon the man who would transform his life. Phil Seaman is a talented but jazz drummer with a drug addiction. Phil didn't simply teach Ginger how to do it. He died on his artistic abilities as well as his tendency toward self-destruction. From Phil, Ginger gained 2 new insights: how to create, how to do drugs, and listen to drums. Sing, get away from reality. A young man who lost his father, who was malnourished while growing up during the War of Love, lived on instinct alone. I received guidance from a talented yet careless individual. These were the components that influenced Ginger Baker. No one could have predicted that back then. One day, this scrawny, wild-eyed child would become the sweetest in rock and roll nightmare. Early career. Baker started performing in local little jazz clubs London, where nobody gave a damn. You might keep your name as long as possible. Time. Ginger also kept time like he did, destined to do it. His drumming was both solid, explosive, and untamed like to African rhythms, but bold and sophisticated like jazz from America. Following a period of time spent playing in, he joined the Smoky Bars Blues Incorporated, the Alexis-led band corner, frequently regarded as the birthplace of blues. From Britain, he encountered rising abilities such as Charlie Watts, a later member of both Jack Bruce and the Rolling Stones. Ginger left his imprint with more than just his method, but with his rebellious demeanor, with the capacity to increase the tempo to levels that are explosive. Nobody had ever heard a drummer similar to him previously. He didn't pay attention to the band. He took the lead. It was with the Graham Bond Company that Baker really got into the fire. This wasn't merely no more classic blues. It was a combination of jazz, improvisation, rock, and R&B. Ginger sounded like he was playing drums in fight using sticks as weapons, and each and every swing a blow through the air. It was, additionally, this is where the fabled conflict with Jack Bruce started. They were both musical geniuses, and neither is prepared to support down. Bruce, whose bass lines are dense, his enormous ego, which was always in odds with Baker, who regulated the speed and declined to be clipsed. Battles erupted in the both backstage and onstage studio. Once, Ginger even used a knife to pursue Bruce. In the end, Graham Bond, the group leader, Bruce had to be fired in order to retain the tranquility. Ironically, though, it was Ginger Baker who subsequently recommended that Eric Jack Bruce is invited by Clapton to a new project named Cream. Nobody is aware of his real cause. Maybe he realized Bruce is a genius. Or maybe he desired to face him directly and demonstrate who was actually in command. At about the same moment, Ginger also started combining African music with jazz rhythms, which he would seek out for the remainder of his life. As other rocks the era's drummers were trapped in 44, Ginger was exploring at the time with cross-time, polyrhythms, and syncopation, resulting in a completely different drumming language. He didn't play merely to maintain the rhythm. For Ginger, the drums were a cry, a voice, a need, from inside, and individuals began to take note, in addition to being a talented drummer, but as a creator who broke their regulations. When Ginger was younger, Baker developed more than merely technique. He created a reputation, a trailblazer, an individual who refused to submit to anybody. Additionally, when the term Cream was born, the world had to pay attention at last. His words, a peak and a tragedy. In 1966, as across Britain, the rock wave burst, and America, as well as Ginger Baker's blazing red hair, erratic behavior, and booming drumming technique, stepped into a whole different era, the creation of a cream. The concept didn't come from Eric rather than him. Clapton was looking for something outside of the conventional blues mold. However, Baker was the one who boldly proposed getting back together with Jack Bruce, the man. He had previously ejected himself from the Graham Bond organization following innumerable clashes. Although it was a bold step and a calculated one, Ginger didn't require a companion, he required a competitor, someone just as strong to light the stage. Thus, three of the strongest British music celebrities, Clapton, Bruce, and Baker, came together to establish a super gang, Cream, a name that denotes excellence. Since their first practice, Cream wasn't like any band before. These weren't composed tunes. They were battles fought on the spot, drums colliding with guitar and bass piercing through like a hailstorm of sound bullets. Clapton inclined toward emotion and self-control. Bruce provided density and intricacy, whereas Ginger Baker performed as though he was destroying every limit that can be imagined. He did not follow. He pushed the whole band ahead. Next, Toad, a drum that was almost 10 minutes long, arrived. Solo that marked the beginning of a new era. One where musicians weren't only rhythm keepers in the background, but front-end artists in the center. The Baker in Toad didn't only a drum. He narrated tales using percussion, imitating violence, untamedness, out of breath, and fury, as if his. With each heartbeat, the heart was yelling. Cream swiftly gained international recognition. Phenomenon. Fresh Cream from the album Draley Gears. 1966 Wheels of Fire and 1967. In 1968, both sides of the Atlantic. Songs such as Sunshine of Your Crossroads, White Room, and Love didn't just at the top of the charts. They reinterpreted what rock music may incorporate blues, jazz, and psychedelic. Muses improvisation. However, as the music soared, the inner workings of the band fell into anarchy. Bruce and Baker, they have never stopped being complete opposites, hating one another. On the stage, they appeared to communicate perfectly through music. It was a battlefield off stage. Bruce would frequently turn up his bass to drown, bring out the drums. In exchange, Ginger would shout, damage tools, and even threaten to use violence, and once almost attacked with a drumstick, Bruce. Eric Clapton, trapped in the center, once explained the similar to being in a trench. He declared, "The music was amazing, but I could not stand it any longer." By the conclusion of Cream formally disbanded in 1968 following only 2 years. Brief, but creating a lasting eternal heritage. They said goodbye. Tour, acting like exhausted combatants, establishing moments that were both broken and victorious. However, Baker continued. In 1969, he collaborated with Blind Faith is Formed by Clapton once more, with Traffic's Steve Winwood. Elizabeth Ann was his first wife. Dent, between 1959 and the year 1977, was when his 3 Kofi, Lita, and Nettie, the oldest children, were created. In the eyes of the people, this was a time period in which Ginger Baker rose to worldwide celebrity, with Blind Faith and Cream. However, as seen by his kids, it was a period of extended absenteeism, tantrums at addiction, home, and disinterest in raising a child. Baker Kofi, the youngest of the trio, trailed after his father's as a drummer's footsteps. However, that didn't bring them nearer. If anything, it widened the gap. Kofi has disclosed that he never received encouragement or pride from Ginger. During Kofi's performance, his dad provided no criticism or commendation, just chilly scrutiny. Sometimes, when Kofi asked him to perform songs about Cream, collectively, Ginger flatly declined, not due to health concerns, but just because he wished to avoid being touched. He considered the song to be his own. Nettie, the oldest daughter, Baker, has a lot of recollections of a difficult upbringing. She wrote about the family in Hellraiser. Following her father, she moved into a caravan, spent all of their funds on racehorses and vehicles. Horses. Each time he came back from traveling, the family prepared itself, never understanding the type of rage he could bring. Following the divorce of her parents, Nettie didn't live with her mother, talked to her father for over 10 years. She eventually reconnected as an adult, primarily to assist with financial or media management when he was having trouble. However, the emotional connection was never really re-established. At the very least, if he and his children born earlier, those born later throughout his years of roaming between the Nigeria and the U.S., grew up even more far away from him. Aruba. Red, the singer, his given name is Natasha Eleanor, daughter of a subsequent union. In interviews, she talked about growing up with a father who is extremely complex and claimed that she was taught early on to keep emotional detachment. She went into music, however, in an entirely other direction, kind, restorative, reflective, everything. That his combative manner was not. He has never been publicly attacked by Aruba. However, she does not conceal the emotional distance. Either. I made the decision to live and work in a way that doesn't replicate my family's behavior. What everyone of Ginger Baker's kids share is a feeling of alienation, an absence of communication, as well as of an actual father. He wasn't violently assaulting, but his aloofness and, at times, quiet was even more painful. I didn't call, write, or inquire how they were. In response to criticism, I typically dismissed it with apathy. I'm not the kind to display feelings. During an interview in 2013, Ginger Baker acknowledged that I ruined every woman who ever approached me. However, he said without regretting it, merely as a matter of fact. In all of his unions, he never craved stability and appeared unable to knowing what long-term emotional commitment. For him, connections tended to be brief, intense, and prone to collapse. Like a spontaneous jam session, it abruptly becomes unrhythmic. Not one of his wives remained by his side to the last end. When he passed away in England in 2019, there had neither a spouse nor a companion by his side. Few of his kids paid him a visit after being silent for years. Heritage and impact. The invention of Ginger Baker was not. He was the first to use the drum kit, but make it into a character. Prior to him, the background was drumming. Drums follow him, may take charge of the main stage, conduct a band, and stop people from singing, merely to hear the rhythm. His best album sales don't measure legacy, nor do sold-out tours, but via his transformation of and perception of the entire generation of what a drummer may be used in contemporary music. With Cream. Even if the band didn't endure as long as, after 3 years, Ginger abandoned the idea of a drum solo beyond the parameters of jazz and positioned it directly into the rock with the song Toad. There was no filler here. It was a solo that lasted longer than 10 minutes, performance that served as a model for innumerable drummers to come, from John Rush, Neil Peart, Led Zeppelin, and Bonham Metallica's Lars Ulrich. His application of polyintricate accents, rhythms, and in rock, syncopation was something that nobody at the time, no one else ventured to try. In the 100 and Rolling Stone magazine's list, Ginger is one of the greatest drummers ever. Baker came in third place, right behind Bonham, as well as Keith Moon. However, in contrast to those two, renowned for playing wildly and passionately, professionals held Ginger in high regard for his jazz basis, which is rock solid. I'm not a rock drummer, I said. I play in a rock group as a jazz drummer. Band. Ginger's impact was widely beyond Cream, despite the fact that the band didn't last long, but he made an impression. Through blues-infused compositions, folk, and jazz. In the era of Ginger Baker Force, he was a trailblazer in combining horns and other traditional African instrument segments, as well as nonlinear harmonic progressions, a structure subsequently investigated by a large number of experimental musicians. His period residing in Nigeria and working for Fela Kuti signaled a significant turning point, connecting Afrobeat with Western rock, a genre with a tribal rhythmic foundation, but organized with contemporary intricacy. Music, since then, academics, have considered this cooperation as among the first turning points in what would eventually be known as global music, a blend of various genres, elements of multicultural music. However, the legacy of Ginger Baker was never simple. Although hailed as a pioneer, he hardly ever sustained long-term partnerships. His erratic character, drive for dominance, and frequent taunts directed at co-workers, many people avoid them. To some, a wild genius Ginger was. To others, all he was a saboteur. Maybe that explains why, in the decades after Cream's breakdown, he never reclaimed the prominence of 1966 to 1968. He lacked a steady band and a long-term record label, no significant advertising leases. However, to younger drummers, whether trained conventionally or self-taught rock musicians, he continued to be an subterranean legend, rumored in rehearsal spaces, as stated by experts' forums, and reverberated in each tom with an accent. Struck or managed an angry snare roll. Numerous who collaborated with him. No one desired to make Ginger Baker their home, but they all aspired to drum like him. Legacy is difficult to understand. It's not amiable, or clean, although it conveys weight, and it persists, not due of honors but due to the discomfort incorporated with each blow. A type of unadulterated feeling that requires no skill can be reproduced using a formula. Last years. Later in life, Ginger Baker didn't experience the splendor of a legendary rock star. Lived in debt, sickness, and solitude as if only his own life. Had been harmed similar to the drum kits he had been beating for decades. Following his stay in Nigeria and the U.S., Baker briefly went back to England and then moved to lately, South Africa, the 1990s. He made his home at a horse farm on the outside Cape Town and nearly cut off all connections to the music sector. People who came to see him characterized an odd sight. A weak, elderly man with a limp cigarette addiction, waking up to take care of horses and smoking through the window while sitting quietly after noon. No co-workers, no friends, no kids by his side on a frequent basis. In 2012, when director Jay Boulier showed up to film the Beware of Mr. Documentary. Baker. At last, he opened his door and then rose to fame once more in a peculiar manner. Baker hit the director, using a cane in the nose during an clash directly in front of the camera. Later, the movie took home multiple accolades, not merely for its priceless footage, but due to the fact that it depicted a genius with a healthy dose of humor, hazardous and extremely isolated. His condition quickly deteriorated in the last 10 years of his life. He was identified as having chronic obstructive lung conditions, the outcome of decades of intense drug usage and smoking. Furthermore, he had significant degenerative arthritis, almost incapable of walking. In spite of the discomfort, he turned down long-term care. No absence of regular caregivers, nursing home, due in part to his disposition and in part due to the fact that his finances were exhausted. In September of 2019, his congressman declared that he had been admitted to a seriously ill hospital state. After less than a month, the death of Ginger Baker occurred on October 6, 2019. Away at a Canterbury hospital, England at 80 years old. The information was verified by his supervisor, not his family. No public funeral was held, no expressions of farewell from well-known peers. A few of his kids came to visit, but none addressed the media. Once, Ginger Baker, "I didn't play drums to win love," he stated. "I couldn't help but play, so I did." His life may be summed up in one quote. He didn't require the viewers to comprehend. His bandmates weren't necessary to pardon. He didn't require his kids to express gratitude. He walked, drummed, and lived away, leaving a storm in its wake that no one could extinguish. Only at retail.